Well, it's great to see all of you out here in the live class. So wonderful. I appreciated what Terry said today. It says, you know, the video's great, but there's nothing that matches seeing someone. And we shared a real handshake this morning, and I enjoyed that. I think I'm ready to take the chance and shake hands again. And welcome to you who are still taking in the class by video. We're delighted to have you join us, and we're going to keep these recordings coming, but there's nothing that replaces being live at the class. So come back as soon as you're feeling comfortable to do it. To the people who are in other parts of the country or the world, we're just glad that you can share with us long distance. Before we begin the class today, I'd like to just point out a couple of announcements. Next Sunday, that's going to be at 11:30, right after the second service. We're going to do our Christmas brunch. This is our annual gift to the class, so don't bring anything other than a great big appetite, some friends, and a really happy spirit. It's such a joyful time. We look forward to that every year. And so if you're coming and we don't have you on the list, if you take a minute to get in touch with Patty or Ann, that would be helpful. But I'm going to tell you the honest truth. We don't care whether we have you on the list or not. All we do is add a little more water to the soup and everything is just fine. So show up whether you're on the list or not. And then I wanted to just give you all a very, very heartfelt invitation to join in with our series beginning next week, Women of the Bible. And I got to tell you, this has been a tough job for me, picking out 7 lessons on women of the Bible. I probably should devote an entire teaching season to it. But starting next week, what better place to start than with Eve? And if you think you know all of the Eve story, I dare you to come to class next week. We're going to get into some pretty deep water next week. In fact, I want to ask your forgiveness, some of you, in advance for some of the things that I will be saying next week. So hopefully that'll be a good teaser and you all tune in. But today we have a special privilege to welcome one of our class missionaries, Mike Floyd, as our guest speaker. Mike is, I just love having Mike here because he is the perfect picture of what ought to be happening in a healthy church. We raised Mike from a child, and he and Lori were called to the field, and Scottsdale Bible sent them out, and they've been active, faithful ministers ever since, and we're delighted to have them here. We go way, way back, Mike. His kids grew up with our kids, or he grew up with our kids, and we have known them well. His folks sang in the choir. We've just had a wonderful, close relationship. And Mike has some very exciting developments to share with you. And so without any further ado, this is going to be a little awkward here for a minute as I get out of this chair and Mike gets in it. Let's welcome Mike Floyd.
All right. Excuse me. Oh, you know what? Something like that had to happen, huh? Okay. Yeah. All right. This is new for me. Both teaching in person and being on a video at the same time. I am used to teaching in person and I'm used to being on a video, but not both at the same time. So I give kudos to Bill for being able to do this every week. It is such a joy to be back with you all. It has been, well, I think maybe a couple of years or a year at least since I taught last. And there's been a lot of exciting things that have happened since then. And of course, all of you know about COVID and all the things that have happened. And it's so good to see so many faces all here together today. What a joy it's been to be back together and feel that, that fellowship in person. As great as Zoom has been, or things like that online has been, it is still not the same. And so good to see so many faces and so many memories. You know, we have been missionaries here at Scottsdale Bible Church for 18 years. And I know many of you have been in that whole journey with us for the last 18 years. And obviously for Bill, you know, he's known us since 30 or 40 years, I have to say. So he's known us since we were just little tykes. Both my wife and I grew up here at Scottsdale Bible Church. We met in the college ministry here, and we're married here. We raised some of our kids here before we left for the field. And this is really like coming home to us. And so this is like sitting in our living room here with all the family. And it is so good to see you this morning. Some of you may be looking and saying, you know, I know you're missionaries, but what is it with SEEDS Global Innovation Lab? It doesn't sound like a mission organization. Actually, SEEDS is a part of Pioneers. And so we opened this SEEDS Global Innovation Lab to help, because we don't just help Pioneers, we help all different mission organizations. And so it allows us to go outside of Pioneers, and so that other organizations like Wycliffe can come in and say, we're partnering with SEEDS Global Innovation Lab. Oh yeah. Good. So it allows them to say, well, there's no conflict of interest. So they kind of, we work with them as an independent contractor. So we help all different organizations. So my specialty in the organization is I'm director of design. Basically the design execution is taking ideas out into the field. And so most of if you've been with a company, you know, most organizations don't have trouble coming up with ideas. They have trouble implementing ideas. And most of their ideas will sit on the shelf. And so what I do is I take those ideas that they have and help them implement them, help them put them into practice. And I'll get more into detail on that in just a minute. SEEDS was originally started, why I came up with the name SEEDS came up from John 12:24. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And this is the idea of innovation. Something usually has to give, something has to die in order for something new to start. And so our old process, our old way of doing things has to stop in order for something new to start. And so that's where we came up with SEEDS, and that's what we really base a lot of our principles off of, is what needs to change. In order for something to change, something has to stop in order for something new to start. A little background on us for those who don't know us. My wife and I, we've been married for 24 years. Like I said, we got married here at Scottsdale Bible Church in the chapel down the way that now is Phoenix Seminary. We've got 3 kids. Our oldest is in his last year at GCU, Grand Canyon University, down on the west side. And he's 20 years old. Our other 2 are still in high school. So our daughter, Grace, is graduating this year from high school. She's 17. And our son, Christian, is 15. My wife sends her regrets she couldn't be here today because she's driving back from a speech and debate tournament in California that ended last night at about 10 o'clock. It's a homeschool Christian speech and debate. Our son, just a real quick story. They went to this tournament. They completely forgot that he had signed up for one of the events, which was called Impromptu. Impromptu, he has to give a 5-minute speech. Just out of he gets a little card that tells him what he's supposed to speak on. And then he has 1 minute to prepare the speech, and then he gives a 5-minute speech. And so he went there not knowing he was competing in this event. And he competes in about 5 or 6 different events. And last night he got first place in Impromptu. So yeah, out of probably several hundred kids in this competition. So he loves that event. He also he competes in apologetics. And so they have 100 different categories. So they go into the competition with 100 different possible things that they might speak on. And they've got a couple minutes to prepare their speech. And then they give a 6-minute speech in apologetics, depending on one of the 100. You don't know which which of one of out of the 100 that you're going to have to speak on. And so he got his second check mark in apologetics, which means he can now compete in nationals. And so he loves this. It's a great place for Christian kids to just make good friends, but also to learn life skills that will carry them for the rest of their life. So anyway, Lori's driving back here. She would have loved to have been with us today, but she couldn't because of this. So sends our apologies. This is our picture when we first left in 2010. Yeah. So if you see our picture, that last picture was what they currently look like. This is what, when we left for the missionary field, we were commissioned by Scottsdale Bible Church in 2003 and left for the mission field when our kids looked like that. This is in 2010, we left for Thailand to work among the Isan people. And so many of you were here when we came and we shared about our passion for the Isan people. And so that's what our family looked like back then. Oh, I do. I'm feeling it more and more. I think, as I was telling, I think so, or somebody I was telling this morning, you know, outwardly, this body is wasting away, but inwardly, I'm being renewed day by day. But I tell you, I'm reminded that outwardly wasting away, and I'm sure many of you can attest, it happens. It's not a choice. So what did we do in Thailand? We were involved with church planning and evangelism. I'm going to share about Thailand because we're still actively involved in Thailand. It's just from a different role. And so, you know, a lot of times you'll see from the picture there, what we were doing, we went out and we shared how to share the gospel. And then we would take people out, take out in teams. And you can see that's our team, some of our team right there. We just go out and we would talk to people. We ended up talking with about 40,000 people over 3 years. So we just met with them and then we asked, what can we be praying for you? And, you know, we would share the gospel with them. Say, I've got a story, can I tell you that? And so over 3 years, we shared with, there was about 44,000 people in that district of where we lived. And we took that team, we challenged them at the beginning to say, we've got 44,000 people. And we asked them, out of the 44,000, when we first did our training, how many of them have heard the gospel? And they estimated about 100. So this is a church that had been there for 10 years. And over 10 years, they figured that maybe about 100 people had heard the gospel out of that 44,000. So we challenged them, is that okay with you? And they said, no, it's not okay. We knew that something needs to happen, but we don't know what to do. So we went out and took them out and showed them how to share the gospel. And over the next 3 years, they shared with about 40,000. And I'm sure probably by now they've already finished it. And then they go back and so even just though you've shared the gospel one time, it doesn't mean that your job is done. You go back and keep sharing it again and again. As the leader, the guy that's in the dark shirt off to the left there, he's the leader. His name is Dai. I left him in charge of that team. He is still going out and he probably sends me pictures, I want to say maybe 10 pictures a week of churches that he's planted or people that he shared the gospel with. His team is still going out on a regular basis to share the gospel. I wouldn't doubt that. He's told me, he said it took 7 times for somebody to share the gospel with him before he was ready. And so we know from them, we encourage them to say, hey, though you've shared the gospel with them one time, go out again and keep going until God prepares their heart and they're ready for it. And so they're out there even to this day on a weekly basis, going out and sharing the gospel, many times at least 100 or so a week that they'll share the gospel with. And so through that, there's been, when I was there, we planted 2 churches, and then there's been probably, I want to say 3 or 4 more churches that have been planted since we came back to the U.S. And more importantly, they still are recruiting and developing even more in the church planting team. So the people that feel comfortable going out and sharing the gospel, they continue to add more to those numbers, because that was our biggest part of our heart, was to grow that team so that people feel comfortable going out sharing the gospel. Those are the ones who are going to be out planting the churches. So we originally started 6 years ago, probably almost 6 years ago last month. We did our first training at our first Isan church. That training, everybody that you see there in that picture was at that first training on how to share the gospel. So we spent all morning practicing how to share the gospel. And actually, the guy in the bottom right, he came to Christ at that first training. It was for the church. It wasn't really for non-Christians, but he found himself, as he was practicing sharing the gospel, he realized he had never accepted Christ. He had never made that decision. And so he accepted Christ. And then over the next 3 years, I think out of the 40,000 people that we shared Christ with, he's probably responsible personally for about 20,000 of those. Say he's about 65 years old. He passed away 2 years ago. And so, but, you know, as much as it breaks my heart that he passed away, the last 3 years of his life was spent just out all the time sharing the gospel. And like I said, he's shared with maybe 20,000 people. His t-shirt says, actually, his name is on his t-shirt. And it says Rung, which is Rung Arun. So his name is Arun. So I'm not sure what the Rung is, usually like a story, but that was not a story. I'm not sure what the other part is. But anyway, he was a dear friend. I remember one day he came to our house. He had been out sharing the gospel all morning. And I gave him tracts a lot of times when they share the gospel, that they have something to hand to them, hand to the people they shared the gospel with. And he came by our house to get some more tracts. And I said, Arun, how'd the day go? Oh, I shared with about 100 people. And I said, was anybody interested? No. And he said it with this big smile on his face. And I thought, he gets it. He knows that it doesn't matter whether anybody's interested. He's sharing the truth. And I asked him one day, what keeps you going? Because every day you're out sharing the gospel. And he said, I don't know what else I would do. I couldn't do anything less than this. And so he really had the joy of the Lord in his heart for the last 3 years of his life. Such a big joy to be around. And I can't imagine how many people are going to be in heaven someday because this man devoted his life to just sharing the gospel. And so, good friend. We didn't really share about this. So even we came back a lot because we were sharing with the persecuted church. This is a team I took over into Laos. Into Laos, this is a small people group called, I think it's called Aku. They're around 600 people. They have their own language, their own culture. This is, I think, the only known church. This is a church way back in the jungle. And we would take teams in there to meet with the persecuted church. They're heavily persecuted by the government. And so a lot of times their leaders will become imprisoned. And so we take people back there and help train their pastors on how to share the gospel and how to start more churches, especially amongst their own people group. And then also to advocate on their behalf. So when they're imprisoned, we have contacts with the U.S. government that make contacts with the Lao government to try and pressure them to release them. Officially, Laos has freedom of religion, but many times on a local level is where you'll find the imprisonment happens. And so they'll say that you've offended our local spirit gods, and so they'll imprison the pastors. And so we try and do as much as we can. A lot of times they'll get kicked out of their homes. They'll have their fields confiscated. And so they'll be left without any rice fields, which is their only mainstay, their only means of income. And so we help on their behalf. So now let me transition to what we're currently doing on the other side of that, which is as we work with the Innovation Lab, we're helping other organizations to innovate in their work. Here's a quote from Derek Seep in his book, Innovation and World Missions. Without a natural mechanism forcing our ministries to continually innovate, we are especially vulnerable to perpetuating outdated programs aimed at yesterday's needs. Our objective should be to fulfill God's calling in a way that understands the times. So we are preparing NGOs, non-government organizations, and faith-based for-profit companies to confidently engage in the unknown future, free of ambiguity and fear. Seeds exist to provide that natural mechanism for innovation. If you look at missions today, it is, and I talked with Bill about this yesterday, Bill's middle name is Carey, William Carey, one of the great known first missionaries. Like, this is the missions movement start. But if you look at, since William Carey, how much has missions changed? It hasn't changed a whole lot. And if you look upon that we still have so many unreached in this world, we're still using the same models to reach the unreached as we did, 100 years ago. And so what we're really looking to do is how can organizations change the model that we're doing in order to reach those remaining unreached? If we're looking for a different outcome, we're going to have a different solution. And that's what it comes down to, is working with other organizations to try and change. It doesn't mean we're changing the gospel or anything like that. Obviously, we're not going to change the gospel. The gospel remains the same. But the way that we reach the people is going to be different. And so we're working with a lot of different organizations and looking at saying, what does missions look like? Here's a story, when we first were over there, I share with you, 6 years ago, we taught them how to share the gospel. We used what was called a C2J, which is a creation to judgment story. And that's very common in the Buddhist world to use that. So we start off with creation and we move all the way through to God's judgment. Well, when we shared that, that was the best way we knew. And so those 40,000 people that I shared about that they shared the gospel with, that was the method they chose. And for that, we had about a 1% response. So that means for every 100 people that you shared the gospel with, one of them received Christ. And through that, we had somewhere close to 40 to 50 people come to Christ. And that's where we planted 2 new churches. And when you're talking about an unreached people group with 0.2% Christian, 0.2%, so that's 2 Christians for every 1,000 people. That's a great number. 1% is wonderful, right? But just before we left to come back to the US, I met with Thai, that gentleman I talked about earlier, the pastor. And I said, Thai, why aren't we getting a greater response? And part of that came out of, as I talked to people, I was asking people, and everybody shared, like, I asked them, what's going to happen to you if you died today? And they would say, if I die today, I'm going to hell. I was shocked. Because if you understand the Buddhist teaching says that you're just going to be reincarnated. You're going to come back again. He said, no, I'm going to hell. I said, why are you going to hell? I said, because I've got sin. I thought, wow, how is it that we're sharing the gospel with these people, and yet we're sharing the gospel in a way that I want to understand is say, you don't have to go to hell. Christ came so that you don't have to go to hell. He paid for your sins. But that's not being received well. And so I asked Thai, I said, Thai, is there some way that we could be sharing the gospel that would better allow them to receive it in a better way? And all of a sudden a light bulb went on. And I didn't understand the gravity of the situation until afterwards. But he went back, and the next day we were due to go out and share the gospel in a new village. And so he went back, and the next morning he called up the entire church planning team, and he said, let's meet an hour before we're supposed to go out. Thinking, this is different. Okay, so he comes and he hands a sheet to all of us. And he said, I want us to try this method. And so he handed us the sheet, and it was a different way to share the same gospel message, but in a different way. And we practiced it, and we all took our turns memorizing this way. We went out and shared the gospel, and immediately we had a 10% response. We went from a 1% to a 10% response. We shared with 30 people, and 3 people came to Christ that day. And I thought, what happened? What just happened? And it was that freedom that I had given him unknowingly to innovate, to create a different way to share the gospel. Same gospel, but just a different way. When I had taught him 6 years before how to share the gospel using C2J, and out of respect to me as their teacher, they had stayed true to that way, that method. And they had been using that exact same method for that following 4 years. And all of a sudden, when I said, hey, is there a better way? It freed him up to say, yeah, I know a better way. He's Isan. He knows the culture even better than I did. I never said that you had to teach it that way, but out of respect for me as their teacher, they had been teaching it that way. But when I challenged him to teach it a better way, he found a new way. And then after that, after we had 3 people come to Christ, we all came back together, and you should have seen the light bulb on their eyes as they said, you know what, I think there's even some more things that we can change. I think there's even a better way. And so he came back, and he had that freedom to innovate. Now, all of a sudden, they were challenged to say, hey, we can do even better. 10% is great, but how can we even do it better? And I tell you, when I was out sharing the gospel with this way that he was sharing, I remember we went out and we visited with one man that was building his house. He was right there in the process of building his house. And I said, I've got something I want to share with you. You've got a minute? He said, sure. So I shared the gospel with him in this new way. And he grabbed that sheet from me and he just kept shaking it. He'd look at it and he just kept shaking it, like it was shaking him to his core. And he said, you have to come back. My family needs to hear this. And so he said, can you come back? I mean, he had every reason just to tell us, hey, I am quite busy. I'm building my house here. Can you, buzz off? But he was really just, he was not one of the three that came to Christ. So out of the three that came to Christ, we had another probably three persons that said, hey, this is exciting. This is really new to me. I've never heard this. Can you come back? And he was one of them that just really was deeply moved by what we were sharing. And does anybody have ever read the Don Richardson story, like Redemptive Analogies? If you've read one of his books about teaching in what is now Indonesia, he talks about redemptive analogies. And we kind of hit on one of those redemptive analogies. In the Buddhist way of thought, we found out that a person can make merit for someone else. So we went to this event where a whole family got together and they scheduled this event, and it was to make merit for their ancestors. And you think, why would you go to an event like that? Well, we were going there to support, there were some Christians there and they invited us. They said they wanted us to go there. But it really struck me when we were there, like that somebody could make merit for somebody else. Why does it strike you? Well, because now we had something that we could help them relate to them, that they had a way that Jesus made merit for them. It's the same when we talk about that we are clothed with Jesus's righteousness, that we wear the robe of Jesus's righteousness. And so now we could share the same analogy when they understand to say, you don't have to go to hell, because that merit, when they do these events, they're trying to do good deeds that they're going to pass on to their ancestors that they think are in hell. Well, if you think about it, now we had an analogy that we could put it into understanding for them to say, no, you don't have to actually go to hell, because Jesus already paid enough merit that he can clothe you with his merit, with his righteousness. And that's what helped them understand and be excited about it. That was something it took us many years to understand the culture enough to be able to make that jump. And now when I say that, I don't want to give you the impression that everybody said, oh, this is great, now I'm going to change. But it allowed some more people who never would have understood the gospel in the way that we were teaching. We were teaching in a way that was very consistent with what we would do in the West, which is, this is the truth. But that's not what really relayed to them the truth of the gospel. They needed something, and God left in their culture ways that they would understand the gospel. And we always prayed as missionaries, Lord, help us to understand their culture enough to be able to make it present the gospel in a way that they'll understand it in their culture and in their understanding. And that was one of the ways that I think opened up the new road for us to share the gospel with them. So now, when we came back, we entered a new season in life. Many of you know, our kids were getting older. They've entered college now. And so we've got to that age where they needed more help to transition back to life in America. Also, our parents have got to the age where they needed more help. And so we're back to kind of honor them and to help them through these years. So this is our new season of life. God opened the door for this to join with a new part of Pioneers that's helping many organizations, not just Pioneers. And so, we're helping the organizations reimagine missions within the challenges of a rapidly changing world. I heard a quote not too long ago that said, we all feel like this world is changing really fast. I think there's probably not a hand that wouldn't go up to say, have you felt like the world is changing really fast? The quote was that the world will never be as slow as it is today. If you think about that, right now it's changing fast, but because of the rate of change, it's never going to be this slow again. And so as we think about missions, when I think about missions, it's dear to heart that we have a passion to see the world hear the gospel of Jesus, these unreached people groups that have never had a chance to hear. We're going to have to be able to change at a rapid pace along with this changing world. Some of those challenges You know, this next generation, we've seen it, you know, that this next generation is not as interested in missions. They're changing their interest. There's reduced funding that's happening across the board. Hostilities by governments. I think I shared with you last time, we had 100 missionaries sent back from China several years ago, or a couple of years ago, because they no longer renewed their visas. They interrogated them. They interrogated like families. They take the children to one side and the parents to another. And I don't know if you can imagine being separated by a foreign government in a foreign land from your children, and you don't know what they're going to do with you or your children. That was very heartbreaking for many of our missionaries. And so those visas aren't coming back. We're not going to be able to send missionaries like we used to in places like China and other countries. And so we're going to have to do missions differently if we still want to reach those same people groups that are still there, still needing the gospel. And so, and then changes in the culture and technology. Those are the obvious ones, you know, technology. Okay, we see, you know, lots of new things with the technology. And I have our newsletter in the back, and I speak about this a little bit. But, you know, in the early church, the archaeologists agree that the gospel was spread by the Roman road system. You know, the Roman road system started with about, I mean, it got up at its peak was about 250,000 miles. This was a very new technology in the early century, was this Roman roads, right? Now, the Romans built these roads to be able to take their armies back and forth, and it helped them conquer what was to become the Roman Empire. But soon thereafter, God used that to help missionaries, basically the early church, take the gospel out by the whole Roman road system. And if you look upon the old Roman road system, if you look on a map, you'll start to point out all the different churches that are in your Bible. You'll see all the names are on that same Roman road system. Today, we have a new Roman road system. And it started, I mean, you could say, well, it's not that new. We've had the internet for a long time. But what's really new is just before we left Thailand, we noticed every farmer, I mean, these are the poorest of the poor, and they all have a smartphone. They all have access to the internet. That didn't happen. When we first got there in 2010, that hardly anybody had access to the internet. I mean, the poor of the world. But even now, you can, for $10, you can go out and buy a smartphone that will get you internet access, especially in these poor regions. And so this, I believe, is the new Roman road system. This Roman road system travels into every household, into every individual of every household. It's a new way. And so a lot of our projects that we work with other mission organizations is, okay, you've got a website. Okay, great. But how are you engaging? How are you engaging with the internet? The internet is not just a way for them to go out and find information anymore. It's a way for us to engage. And so it's now potential that we might not send missionaries back to some of these really difficult places where we can't get visas, but the internet's there. Is there a way for us to engage the same people, but through a different way? Instead of maybe sending missionaries, maybe we're going to engage it differently. And so that's what we're working with other organizations. How can this be done? I'm not here to say I know, you know, here's the question, what should missions work look like now? And I have a meeting this next week with Wycliffe and several other organizations asking this very same question. What does missions look like? We know it's different, but what does it look like now? I can't answer that because we're going to work on it together with them, but it's going to be different. So let me transition from there and let's talk a little bit about, I wanted to go through a scripture passage this morning. And not to scare you, but in the next 20 minutes, I want to cover an entire book of the Bible. Okay, I know I see a bunch of people looking at their watch. They're like, yeah, how's that going to be done? But I titled it Walk in the Truth. And luckily for you, it is the shortest book in the Bible. And I picked it without even really knowing much about it. It's one of those that I think it's really easy to ignore or just, you know, the book of the Bible is 3rd John. And so 3rd John is the shortest, 2nd John is the second shortest. These are two books by the Apostle John. And we'll go through that really quick. It's just more of a devotional, but John encourages us to walk in the truth. And so I want to go through that with you as what that means. There was a little mix-up, so I got this mix-up. So I originally intended us to read this out loud. I know the font is probably too small, so you want to give it a shot. If you feel like you can read it up there, please join along. Otherwise, if you can't, just listen in and I will read it. So let's start. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. For I was overjoyed when brothers came and testified to your truth. That is, how you are walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brothers and sisters, especially when they are strangers, and they have testified to your love for the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God, for they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support such people, so that we may prove to be fellow workers with the truth. I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with malicious words, and not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brothers either, and he forbids those who want to do so, and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does what is good is of God, and the one who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone, and from the truth itself, and we testify too, and you know that our testimony is true. I had many things to write to you, but I do not want to write to them with a pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we will speak face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. This is, a very personal letter that John wrote. And so a little background here. This is, 3rd John was written, as you see in there in the bottom, is written to one believer named Gaius. John wrote 1st John, was written to all believers. These things I've written to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know you have eternal life. All believers. 2nd John was written to just a few believers. The elder to the chosen lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which remains in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace be with us, will be with us, from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and in love. And so a little bit about 3rd John. 3rd John, I think it's estimated that it was written somewhere between 65 to 90 AD. It's John's 3rd letter, obviously. It starts off the epistle. And so if you've read some of John's letters, you know that he called himself the epistle. Some reason because of the persecution that he didn't use his first name. You may ask, well, why did he use Gaius's name? Well, Gaius was a very common name. Actually, Julius Caesar's real name was Gaius. And so obviously you couldn't go back and persecute Gaius without knowing, without finding 100 in every village probably. And so that's why it's surmised that he used the elder, but it was also because John was up there in age at this point when he's writing this letter. It's interesting, John is still getting around. He still wants to, even at this place, you remember that even if it was 65, this would have been over 30 years after Jesus' resurrection. And so John is still getting around and visiting the churches, the same as the Apostle Paul. And still, seemed like at that time, probably a very active gentleman. Okay, so the first starts off after he says, the elder to Gaius, he says, "Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers." Now, before you get the idea that this is some prosperity gospel, first time I read that, I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. Is somebody going to read this and say this is like, John's praying for their prosperity? And this was an actual normal greeting that was given in letters. And so when John writes this, actually, it was to such a point that it was even abbreviated. So the word prosper literally means to have a good journey. It metaphorically means to succeed or prosper. It's like saying, I hope things go well with you. Both the verbs for prosper and be in good health belong to the same everyday language of letter writing. And the phrase is so common, like I said, that it was abbreviated SVBEEV. Si vales bene est ego valeo. It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So it's, if you are well, it is good. I am well. And I thought about, do we have anything like this in English? And just a little tidbit, like it used to be in the 1500s that people would write in their letter, God be with you, and they would abbreviate it, God be, and God, and then the BWYE, God be with thee. And then later, we all changed that. Somehow it changed to goodbye. If you ever wondered, where did we get goodbye from in our English language? It originally was God be with you, God be with ye. And so 1500s. So it's something that if you saw that in a letter, you knew exactly what it meant. And so this was in John's letter. He said, beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. Now, one thing that make a note on that, the passage we read, John, here we have the shortest book in the Bible, 15 verses, and John uses the word truth 7 times. 7 times out of 15. And if you actually go back and look at the 1st and 2nd John, he also uses it many times in those. If you go back to the Gospel of John, there's 20 times John uses the word truth. Truth seems to be really important to John. And so let's talk about that. So in 3rd John, I was overjoyed when brothers came and testified to your truth, that is, how you're walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. First of all, your truth, the first part. This is not like our generation today would say, well, this is relativism, this is his truth and my truth. This isn't what it's talking about. This is not a relative truth. Obviously, John was there when Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If that sounds exclusive, it's exclusive. There is no other way. And there is only one truth. And so John's, we have to look at and say, when he's talking about what is your truth, he's talking to Gaius. Gaius's truth was that he was walking in the truth, which is the one truth. He's walking in genuineness and authenticity of who the truth is, Jesus. And then he says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear my children walking in the truth. I told you our kids are now entering college age. And as a parent, this never became more real to me than when you send your kids off to college. Right now we're losing if you believe the statistics, we're losing about 80% of our Christian kids who go off to college and walk away from their faith. And when our oldest went off to college, I was worried. I didn't actually care as much whether he finished college, whether he got his great job, whether, any of the other things in life. I was most concerned and have been most concerned that he would choose to follow God, that he would walk in the truth. And about a year ago, all of a sudden, he just started to blossom. He loves to worship. He's a part of a local outreach over at Grand Canyon University, where they go out and minister to women and children that are in domestic violent situations they're being rescued out of that. And he just grew such a love for worship. And then his faith started to grow. He spent time in the Word, and he just started to write this authenticity of, I'm really growing in my faith. And I tell you, there was no greater joy in my heart as a parent than to see him walking in the truth. And so here it is. We have John writing this to Gaius, and that he has no greater joy than this, to hear of his children. Here it is. Gaius must be one that he has led to Christ. And now he hears word back that Gaius is walking in the truth, and he has no greater joy. And I'm sure many of you are parents, and you can understand that. What he's writing about is when your children, both physical or even those you have led to Christ, walk in the truth, there is no greater joy. So let's move on. In 2 John, he also writes the same, something very similar. He writes, the elder to the lady chosen by God and to her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth because of the truth, which lives in us and will be forever. Again, John is focused on his children walking in the truth, and I love in truth. It means I love in genuineness. According to the gospel of Jesus, I love you. That's the truth. And so he keeps focusing on the truth. And then grace and mercy, peace, and God from God the Father and from Jesus Christ the Father, Son, will be with us in truth and love. Again, John is using this word truth. Now he uses it. One thing when I looked up, he uses it in lots of different contexts. When you look through here, you'll see that, like he said, at one point was your truth, and another place, walk in the truth. He uses this, and I was trying to come up with a definition that we could just translate it and say it'll work in all these different instances. I looked at all sorts of different commentaries. I looked at and we'll look here in just a minute. It's really difficult to find one that just stands in all circumstances in our English language. But the best I could come up with is authenticity to what you believe in. It gives me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth. Again, this is in 2 John, just like 3 John, he comes back to walking in the truth. So here's what I found on the word truth. Aletheia is the word for truth in the Greek. Here's some definitions that it gave. What is true in any matter under consideration? Truth, fact, reality. What is true in things appertaining to God and the duties of man, moral and religious truth. The truth as taught in the Christian religion, respecting God and execution of his purposes through Christ, and respecting the duties of man, opposing alike to the superstitions of the Gentiles and the inventions of the Jews, and the corrupt opinions and precepts of false teachers, even amongst Christians. I have to say, none of those really resonate with me to say, hey, this works in all these instances. If you go back to all the instances of truth, I think there was some wordplay that John was using here. And just in the same sense, when he says, he uses the word truth to even imply about Jesus, when Jesus says, I am the truth. And so some of the instances imply that this is talking about Jesus. Other instances imply that he's talking about the authenticity of walking in the precepts of Jesus. And so there's no one specific, I think, translation or that would work in all the different instances. We have to look at each one independently to understand that there might be different meanings. And especially when you're talking about in those times when there's lots of persecution, John was sharing in times and using words just like he did for himself when he used the word elder, that he was hiding something, he was sharing something that all of them knew to be true, but he would use it in a way. So when he talks about the truth, he was talking about it in a way sometimes that this one pertains to Jesus, this one's pertaining to walking in truth and authenticity in truth, and this one pertains to walking in the light, and we'll go through that in just a minute. So why is John so focused on the truth? This is from 1 John. This is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. If we say we have no sin, we are deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Again, this comes back to fellowship. Like when we so long for our children to walk in the truth. It's about their fellowship with Christ, right? When your children are walking in the truth, they have fellowship both with you as a fellow believer, but also, John says, they have fellowship with the Father, with he himself, right? Walk in the light as he himself in the light. We have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So I think that's the focus of why he's so focused on the truth. Let's move on to, I've only got a few minutes left. Gaius was the good example. So when he's talking about Gaius, his son, beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brothers and sisters, especially when they are strangers and they have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God, for they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support such people so that we may prove to be fellow workers with the truth. What is this about? In the early church, there was these itinerant missionaries, basically itinerant pastors that went from church to church. They didn't know these people, they were strangers, but he still calls them brothers and sisters. They're brothers and sisters in Christ, but strangers, they're not blood relatives. And so Gaius was taking them in, and they would stay with him. They would come in, preach at a church or share the gospel in different places, and then go out and go to a different place. I tell you, other than this being our home church, we probably would have been staying with many of you every time we came back had we not already had family to stay with. Because I know many of you have been you take in missionaries, you've supported missionaries. And I think just like John is commending Gaius for his example, I commend many of you for what you've done for missionaries like me and for our class missionaries and for the missionaries at Scottsdale Bible Church. You have been praying for us and supporting us, and we have felt that warmth. And I tell you, just like John says here, therefore we ought to support such people so that we may prove to be fellow workers with the truth. You have been fellow workers with us. Though you did not go to the field among the Eson, you were there with us in spirit. You were fellow workers with us by your support and your love and care. And we have felt that. And so just like Gaius is a good example, we commend you for your good example. Now, this is, as opposed to Diotrephes, the bad example. I wrote something at the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with malicious words, and not satisfied with this, he does not receive the brothers either, and he forbids those who do so, and puts them out of the church. He starts off, I wrote something in church. He wrote a letter to Diotrephes. And Diotrephes rejected that letter. That was supposed to be shared with the church, and he rejected it. And then, because why did Diotrephes reject it? He wants to be first. If John's sharing his letter, John's going to be the first, and he wants to be first. So Diotrephes is the bad example here, and we're going to see later, do not imitate the bad example, imitate the good example. And so John's calling attention to this. What else that he does? He falsely accuses John and the other pastors and teachers and missionaries. And then not only does he not receive these people, he actually says, anybody that does receive them, you are out of the church. And so this Diotrephes is not only against having these missionaries and pastors and teachers come, he's against even anybody else receiving them. Lastly, Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself, and we testify too, and you know that our testimony is true. I had many things to write to you, but I do not want to write to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we will speak face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. Demetrius is most likely the person that's delivering this letter. So think of Demetrius, and he goes on to say, he's telling Gaius, Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone. You're receiving this letter from Demetrius. Know that this man has a good testimony. His reputation follows him everywhere. And I encourage all of us that our reputation should follow us everywhere. People know when you have a good reputation. And from the truth itself, this is, like I said, when he's talking about just the truth speaks of who Demetrius is. And I hope the truth speaks for all of us of who we are. And because of time, I'm going to move on real quickly and go to just finish with a blessing. You know, Thailand, the Isan people have made a tremendous impact on our life. We went over there to share and to teach and to share the gospel. But we came away with many things. And one of the things we came away with is in the Isan culture, you don't leave without sharing a blessing. We found that this was really a biblical principle that they already have ingrained in their culture. And the day we left, we had so many friends asked to stop and see us. We stopped in the middle of like what's basically like a Circle K, and had a little area where we walked, and we had just people coming by that we knew and said, we have to give you a blessing before you go back to America. And in their culture there, water is extremely important. About 8 months of the year, it's dry. I don't know if you've had a dryness. Yeah, I guess Arizona does have some dryness. So it's very common in that culture that you might, when we would go out and share the gospel, you would come to somebody's house, and outside their house was this jug of water and a cup. It's basically there for anybody that's going by. It's a way to bless them, that they can get a cup of water. Water is like life to them, like living water. There's some blessing in water. And so in their culture, when you give a blessing, and if you've ever heard of Songkran, is a big water blessing festival that happens in Thailand. It turns in like it starts off where you bless one another with water. You pour water into their hands and somebody else's hands, and they take the water and they rub it over your head or your shoulders, and they give a blessing to you. And then the opposite happens. You pour water in their hands and they bless you. And so the water acts as kind of a blessing. And so this picture that you see here is a young woman, a good dear friend of ours, she's pouring water into our hands so that we can bless her, and we give blessing, mutual blessing back and forth to one another. And it is ingrained in the culture that we bless, and water is a big part of that blessing. So today I'm not going to splash water on you, by the way, but I want to bless you. And as we say goodbye, I want to say, may your love abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. That's from Philippians 1:9-11. And I'll also say, God be with you. So thank you all for having me this morning. Thanks for what a joy it is to come and share with you. I'm open. I'm here for any questions that you may have afterwards. If you want to stop in and just ask him questions. We love you. We miss you all. And just pray God's blessing over you. Thank you again.
Amen. Thank you, Mike.